welcome to this week of the HITRUST user group. Want to just kind of go through ground rules. I think we're all here that know it, but just in case people are watching this recording later, um, this is a non-compete space. It's collaborative. It's a way to ask questions, find new ideas, new pieces and parts of HITRUST that we may not already know, and to just collaborate and blow off steam if we need to, or talk about things that we find are cool or exciting, and just come up with ideas for keeping the discussion going. All right, does anybody have anything to talk about today?
I got a bunch of questions.
Perfect. Go for it.
Let's start with those.
So the larger project that I'm working on is mapping all of our controls to policies, procedures, undesirable outcomes, and eventually dependencies. It's like this huge project we kicked off, where it's very heavily relied on, where HITRUST is very heavily relied on. So I have a very specific definition of what I need for controls, and I'm not sure where to find that in my CSF. So we have the requirement statement, policy, procedure, and the implementation guidance. What I'm missing is the control objective. And also,
objective.
Yeah,
it's
so like
probably one of the reports.
Yeah, I've been clicking around in there and I had to do some magic in Excel to match up. So I found out that the BWID isn't necessarily the best thing to like map to other things. I found out it's the CVID, which
CVID.
Yeah. So like, I knew that. I wish I knew that a number of years ago.
Well, it didn't exist a number of years ago, actually.
Oh, okay.
CVID is new. So they've only recently created it. You have not missed a hot minute. It was only recently created, and it's used as a bridge ID to actually map back to previous frameworks. So it's very useful in that circumstance, because it will connect you to previous, might be slightly different controls, but that CVID will be really valuable. So I would strongly suggest capturing that in whatever kind of, if it's a database or data, whatever you're creating, capture the CVID. That's going to be very useful for you going forward.
And I can show you guys an example of, can I share my screen? Is that allowed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, that's allowed. Don't share any PHI.
Okay. All right.
Or confidential information.
So if we go over to my copy of ISO 27002 and we go to any of these, we have a purpose, which in some cases is the objective, right? So like we have the control, we are going to do this thing, and here's the reason why we're doing it. So that way I can say for any type of control, this control is a physical control. It has this objective, and we tested it on this date. So not entirely sure where to find that within my CSF. Like I know I can go back and map ISO to 20 to like it, but I have to do a whole bunch of mapping back to the original source of the control to get that. And even then, things like ISO 27001 don't necessarily have an objective associated with the control. It just said this thing, and then list out requirements for that thing. Any thoughts on there?
I don't know that HITRUST has objectives. They have illustrative procedures, which are not so illustrative in a lot of circumstances. Sorry. They have those. I mean, the best thing, I guess, is, they have broken down the controls, but really it takes an interpreter to take the language that they have, which is heavy legalese, and actually translate it into, right, what does that mean? I am not aware of a report which just shows their objectives. There is an illustrative procedures report, but again, some of the illustrative procedures are not quite as illustrative as one might hope.
Yeah, and I don't have access to my CSF right now, but what I'm thinking of is there's in the control libraries themselves, so not the reports that are specific to your assessment, but within, and I don't know if they've moved it to analytics or, it used to be part of that, that dashboard and all of that, but there's a way that it's kind of, hold, it's, I think it might even be when they're using those 13 control categories that they may have control objectives in there, because that is more based on ISO 27001 at that point. And then when they create the assessment, it kind of morphs and maps over to those 19 HITRUST categories. So I'm
Domains.
wondering
Yeah.
if some of those control libraries would have a control objective in them. And again, to Donna's point, it's still going to be a manual process. I don't think there's any automated mapping from, this this ID that, HITRUST is using as a unique identifier back to those control libraries. But that might be where you can kind of find it, at least at the higher level.
Yeah, I just found it.
I mean, they have like a NIST dashboard, NIST scorecard, that sort of thing.
So here we go. I just found the
Yeah,
control
there you go.
objective. Yep, so there it is, and it was found under reports and then CSF library.
Okay.
So
CSF library.
yeah.
Thank you.
So
it's always good to know.
yeah, so what I'll have to do is, I'm guessing, grab the CV ID.
And you should see like 09AB or 10 dot, something, and it should map back to that like 0 dot. You should see those. And I think the zeros, if I remember correctly, is like the information, the HITRUST domain 1, the information security program.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'll have to kind of read that control objective and then see, okay, where would that map, or just do a search for, 0.0. And that one will come up probably with a lot, because there's probably a lot of IDs that have that, but you should be able to kind of map it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that is still maybe a little more broad than you might hope, because it still doesn't feel like it's at the individual control level, rather the control groups.
Right.
But I think for a policy document, you probably want to have it as a more broad objective and not that granular. This is the prescriptive how you're going to do it, but this is more the broader why you're doing it.
Right. Yeah, and I can do a handful of them and see if the control objectives that they have here map the way I want them to map, to kind of like paint the picture of the control.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing is, like, I've spent a lot of manual, so we have to do HIPAA. We're on HITRUST 11.3.2. We have the AI risk management framework, and we're doing the new AI security certification. I've spent a lot of time going manually through my controls, finding the mapping. And there's a report in here that gives you the specific control, and in a carriage return column, like a whole bunch of values for one particular control of what it maps to, and it's very, very specific. I finally found a way to break that apart using an Excel function. So in part of my exercise of building out this massive database of how we implement the controls and what they map to, the ultimate use case for it is, are we doing everything we should be? As far as like a compliance framework standpoint, because we have to do HIPAA, we choose to do HITRUST, and like so on and so forth. Eventually, at some point, I'll probably recognize a gap internally, and then do some internal remediation procedures there. Has anybody found any way of, I guess, an easier way than finding what your current control framework within HITRUST maps out to other things, other than doing that manual analysis?
There was under, like I said, it used to be under dashboards. I'm not sure if it still is, but there was an analytics piece of it, and then you could choose. There was like a drop down or something, and you could choose the requirement or the what framework it was that you were looking for. And then it used to be able to export that. And I think that was a huge proprietary. I mean, that's kind of HITRUST secret sauce there. So they don't let you export it and, kind of use it that way. But you can take a look at those controls and say, okay, because I mean, that's how they do like the NIST standard. So when you get a HITRUST certification, you can also get that, where are we with NIST? And they'll have some of the NIST controls that'll be like, well, this doesn't apply in a HITRUST setting because it's not one of the controls we look at. But you can kind of see that. And there's somewhere in there, I can't navigate to it exactly, but there is some analytics in there about that. But you have to take it one framework at a time.
Yeah, so take a look under reports at the authoritative source report cards. And then you have to select whatever your assessment is, but you can then go and select the authoritative source that you want to compare. And it's got NIST and ISO, FedRAMP, that sort of thing. Perfect. So that might be helpful.
Yeah, it is. And it has that CVID in there as well.
Yep. Now, what are you using to store this kind of database of information? Not Excel.
Postgres. Definitely not Excel. So we have this grander design, so to speak. So like up here we have, let's say corporate objectives, right? And then we have the business units, and then that translates into strategy. And then strategy is dependent on, people, systems, and products, right? And so for each one of those things to implement the strategy, like we need to know where we're at with our current controls and wherever they come from, and what our risks are. So like the idea behind this is to have one location for all controls, all incidents, including control scorecards that we're designing, because I don't think it's enough to say something's on or not. You definitely need to test it. And my direct report is really good about proactively going out there and testing the controls to make sure everything's good. So for example, on our laptops, USB drives aren't allowed. Like there's a technical control that when you plug that in, it just sits there and does nothing, right? So he's really proactive about testing the controls on new machines, existing machines, and things like that, and even encryption in transit. So, but then we map the controls to specific either people, systems, or products, right? And more specifically, things within our organization that we control, right? And then if it's by default by a provider, like a third-party dependency or something like that, we still map it. But there's two different types of control mapping. One is the dependency itself is subject to control, and the second one is the dependency itself is the means to implement the control. So, for example, you have an antivirus solution, let's say. So you might add controls onto it as far as like the deployment or the SaaS portal that you have to log into to manage that thing. But then the antivirus itself is the control to stop malware and things like that. And so the end result is going to be a very, hopefully a very good snapshot of where our risks are in both a dependency standpoint, but also from a strategic standpoint, because once we do the scorecards, we should be able to see which controls are lacking, and then which controls are lacking in the context of strategy, right? Because if one strategy is really high on the list, but we're lacking in controls, we can take that into account and possibly add more to it.
Yep, absolutely. That's really good. Have you considered or have you considered whether or not policies and procedures and that sort of documentation is going to be part of this ecosystem of data?
Yes. So we have a document table with all of our policies and procedures. It's just an inventory for now, right? So like instead of actually storing the shall statements and things like that, currently our policies and procedures exist within our documentation repository. It used to be SharePoint. We migrated that over to Confluence because the majority of our technical documentation, like from other teams, was stored there. So whenever we need to link anything, it made no sense to go out to SharePoint. Like, let's just
Right.
bring that all into one location. So we have the inventories for policies, procedures, standards, SOPs, and I think one other one that I can't remember right now, but those
Mhm.
are classified within the documents table. And
Okay.
so it starts off with a negative outcome, right? And then that's the reason to have the control, and the controls are implemented through policy, procedure, and SOP, and
Sure. Yeah.
classified that way.
So it as just a, you may have already considered this, but if you've already got this information stored or a strategy to store it within this, kind of ecosystem of data, make sure you have the ability to extract the controls, policies, procedures, because that is then a one button push out during your HITRUST assessment. And anybody who knows that the HITRUST assessors rely on that map to the policies and procedures, that for the organizations that don't have it, it's a long journey. For the
Yes.
organizations that do have it, don't lose it, maintain it, keep it up
Yeah,
there.
that's actually like inside the policy and procedure. So like I had to do so much work over the past couple years.
Mm.
We found all the BWIDs, and we put all the BWIDs inside the policies and procedures. That
Mm-hmm.
way, when you just do a search within Confluence, it brings up every document that contains that.
Yeah.
Because, like you'll have one policy statement, but then you might implement it across two different procedures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or something to that effect.
Yes.
So having that mapping is extremely helpful. But to your point, that's also the first thing that our assessors ask for is like, hey, we need your mapping. Like, where does all this
Yes.
exist? So it definitely helps. But that was also part of the initial mapping that we did. We grabbed all those BWIDs and then
Mm-hmm.
mapped them over to specific document IDs. That way we could
Right.
easily extract it. So good call there.
Yes. Yes. Does
Yeah, and I
anybody
think it
else
helps.
have?
Well, as
Oh
I say,
yeah,
I
sorry,
think it
jumped
helps
in,
the
Susan.
auditor understand, because they're walking in cold to your organization, and it helps
Yes.
them get a really good feel for it and see, how things are structured, what nomenclature
Mm-hmm.
you use, who's responsible for what. So it kind of gives them just a map of, how security is overlaid at your organization and who they need to
Mm-hmm.
talk to, and what interviews they'll need to make. So that's
Yeah.
always helpful to have it. That's why they ask for it first, I think.
Yep.
Any other
Thanks for
questions?
all the
Yeah.
input. Like it's good stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Love having a good chat around storing control information.
Well, I have a couple of things that I wanted to go through with
Mm-hmm.
everybody. We had I finally am starting to be a little more formal and process driven around these recordings and getting them out and everywhere. So I wanted to share with you. Ended up creating a YouTube channel, which is bizarre to me, but so we've got this new YouTube channel. It's called HITRUST Secrets, and I kind of wanted to double check with everybody and see does that resonate? Because I'm thinking it hopefully will help with people who may not understand what we're doing, that it's these are the things that nobody thinks to tell you or you don't think to ask, and it can
Mm-hmm.
help with kind of demystifying the whole thing, because it is, if you're starting out with HITRUST, you have to put in an awful lot just to kind of figure out if you're even have the appetite to go all the way through a certification. It's not just oh yeah, by the way, let's just add this on, so hopefully these sessions will help people with that. So I've just got a couple things in there right now, but I was going to kind of have this be our one-stop shop for that.
Love it.
I like it. Well, yeah,
Good.
I really like the channel name too, Security. Like that's
Well, I was actually going to change that to HITRUST Secrets, but security is, well, that's my nickname. So I was like, I don't want to. If everybody's good with this, I wanted to keep security as a channel name, and I was going to create a whole new channel and move this over to that, but call it like HITRUST Secrets or something like that. So, um,
I
so
personally like security,
okay,
but you know,
yeah, but I don't want it to be just
yeah,
it's because I mean it really is Donna, Jeff, and I that kind of founded this, and Stephen, and Rod, I know you guys have been, consistently coming to these. So, I mean, it's more than Sue Richards and security. It's, the whole thing. But yeah, security is the nickname I go by just because out and about and, without being just with InfoSec people, I want it to be an approachable subject for people. And, this way it kind of breaks down that barrier so that people aren't like, oh, you're going to tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. I'm like, no, we're going to partner together and we're going to do it the right way, kind of thing.
So risk management done correctly is a successful navigation
right.
to make sure you're keeping pace with your competitors because they solve it. So you got to figure it out.
Right. So Sue, I love it. I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
And I think HITRUST Secrets is good. We need a catchy name. A couple of others I'll toss out there. Maybe HITRUST Heroes.
Ooh.
I like anyway. Or this describes my personality. So control freaks. Anyway, just ideas.
So HITRUST control freaks.
Yeah, I like that.
So what do you think would be the one that would kind of get more people to kind of understand what we're doing here? HITRUST control freaks?
No, I don't want to weigh in on that. I think HITRUST Secrets is awesome. So,
okay.
But the other point I was going to make, if you're going to do YouTube, then maybe do a Facebook as well. While I don't get a ton out of Facebook, the cookies are there so that if you're doing a YouTube channel, then it's going to pop up in your Facebook as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We could do it.
Yeah, we could do an episode called Control Freaks.
That's true.
That sounds like a good way to incorporate that because I love that. Yeah. So are there any other challenges that people are coming up with right now that we want to, oh, sorry, Sue, did you have something else that you want to talk about?
No, that was it. I was going to create a LinkedIn group very similar to it. And I think I started with that, but I figured that way it's a place where we can always have the link for this, live presentation, if you will, or, way to get questions answered. But I think having this in an asynchronous way so that people, I have a question and hopefully it's a searchable type of thing. So, I just put these other two little ones out there just to kind of, so I wouldn't have just one video, but I'm going to start building this as a structured library, etc. So
that sounds great.
The maturity is growing along with our group. So it's good to see.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I saw, and I'm guilty of this as well, like the naming of HITRUST originally was Health Information Trust, right? So when I was talking to Ryan the other day, and I'm not sure how to solve this problem, when I mention HITRUST, people immediately think healthcare, and that's just not the case, right? Like it's across all organizations. Like even if you just want to like gauge your internal controls that have nothing to do with PHI, right? So there still seems to be some kind of like educational issue that'll probably get fixed over time, but that we'll probably discuss at some point as an issue overall in the HITRUST industry, let's call it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I've actually asked HITRUST to consider doing a core set of operational controls, distinct from any specific platform or product environment or anything, because they have really strong operational controls. And there are organizations that I've worked with who would love to be able to leverage, those types of controls as a core. We are in a highly sensitive industry or a highly controlled industry, and we want to make sure that we're going above and beyond just what the legislation says. We want to make sure that we're taking every possible step security wise on operational controls, which aren't necessarily specific to PHI. How are all vendors vetted? What is that vendor? I tell people all the time, just keep a list, all vendors. Which vendors? All vendors, literally all vendors. Everybody you hire, from the cleaning person and somebody who paints the wall, like all vendors, because then you can classify them. in different risk categories, you can use 3. It doesn't have to be, a huge, effort. But if you've got general strong risk categories, you can then say, right, there's no gray area here. When you're working with your assessors or when you're looking at different risk management approaches, it's not specific to healthcare. It is, what is the risk, or the potential exposure this vendor or this, external party has with your business. And just, kind of approaching things like that. But there are core operational things that are so valuable across all industries.
Well, and
Yes.
even, cleaners, you think about, okay, they don't have access to your data processing, but they do have physical access and they have physical
Yes.
unattended access. So there is still a potential risk there unless you've
Yes.
got good controls as far as locking everything away, turning off the computers, things like that. So, maybe the person that you cater, that caters your lunches or something like that isn't as big of a risk because there's somebody there, they're attended. But your cleaning crew may
Yes.
be, if you have a 3 level, they may be in that moderate risk
Yes.
level, only because, you do have to kind of make sure that your intellectual property isn't walking out the door because you failed to secure it. So
yeah. And think about what's in your rubbish bin.
exactly. Versus your shredder. Yeah. And what's left on your
Sometimes
printer
it's more than you think.
Right.
And also, like, for different industries, I'm seeing this a lot with law practices. And it was funny when I first was talking with some people in the industry. They were like, well, have you thought about presenting what you do for law practices? And I was like, well, first off, there's not a lot of laws around. There's guidelines and recommendations, which makes sense because most legislators are lawyers and they don't want to be boxed into a law or regulation. So they want a general guideline. But also I see it for bookkeepers, accountants, things like people like that who are in a financial services industry who also privacy is a big thing. So, but I think right now I'm just trying to tackle within the healthcare space, not just hospitals or business associates, but even, dentists and mental health therapies that maybe don't realize what they have. The fact that they're storing things and they need to protect it. So
yeah, you're dead on. Like the small business, like either don't know or they're just like not financially capable of like doing some of these major certifications because HITRUST is an investment, right?
Exactly. But the software as a service vendors that they're using need to make sure they're keeping up with it. And so, that's really where it's like, it may not be the dentist or the therapist that needs to necessarily be HITRUST certified, but counsel them to say, well, where you're putting your patient information and where you're keeping your scheduling and all that, what happens if it is breached and you can't get to it for a week? What happens to all that? So, having just them thinking about where their data lives and how to protect it. So yeah, I don't necessarily see it's necessarily them, but they need to be asking those questions of their vendors. And it's refreshing to see a vendor that gets it, when you're dealing with somebody and they're like, okay, front and center, I'm HIPAA compliant, I'm HITRUST certified. And you're like, oh, what a relief,
Yeah. And I think I would really encourage more investors to look at HITRUST as a good gauge for helping to vet early stage organizations. It doesn't have to be an R2. It can be, a smaller subset, and look at how you can, do a set of the 44 controls or something along those lines. But, what are your core? It leads you through a process, right? It starts asking the questions. What are your business continuity plans? How are you going to survive different scenarios? They're not all cyber attack scenarios. What if your CIO likes to go, drinking with the CTO and they both wander off one night? Who knows where the keys to all your tech lives? Basically there are other circumstances that come into play where you have to kind of be heads up about what if these core individuals don't let this information live in your head. And that's part of the rigor of going through something like HITRUST is the documentation. document it, prove it, document it, prove it. And you can restrict that access. You don't need everybody in your company to know what that information is. When I've worked with organizations, I've even encouraged, some of the restricted information security procedures to be centrally located so everybody can see them. But if you click on the button, you don't have access. Only the right people have access. However, you know where it lives. So should things go pear-shaped, very, very strange occurrences happen, somebody can ask for the right access or can, engage the right level of access to get to it. They know where it is. Right? It's not an Easter egg hunt on somebody's desktop.
Right. Or find out that you don't have it. You think you might.
Or find out it only lived in their head.
Exactly. It only lived there. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Very painful.
Anybody else?
I got another topic I want to ask you guys about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
So I called Ryan because I saw some posts on LinkedIn and I was like, hey, I want to run something by you. And he didn't have like a clear answer because I think HITRUST is working on something in the background. He said, how would you guys on the call feel about a subset of controls that are continuously monitored? Let's say on a automated and monthly basis. Would you guys find that valuable from an assurance standpoint, where when you get your annual HITRUST certification, it also includes a history of controls that were tested 12 times, right? So encryption at rest for your laptops, timeouts for your laptops, prompting for a password, which are all configurations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which could potentially just, the status of those things could be an API call, right? Which means you could automate the status of it and have some kind of dashboard, or whoever does your assessment could like pull that or something like that. Would you guys find that valuable as far as HITRUST and evidence and like the assurance to your clients and partners?
I think my instinct is it would be valuable, especially if it aligned with, say, an E1. So you're looking at that core set of controls. You're looking at monitoring that focuses on that core set of controls, so that it's a meaningful, set of controls. But there are a lot of, well, I shouldn't say there are a lot. There are an increasing number of monitoring solutions out there, but trying to align with the things that are also meaningful for HITRUST, which has grown in, kind of, I turn to HITRUST and go, well, what is, if I need something security wise or, to be buttoned up, I look at the guidance from HITRUST on that, because when you're talking about a breach rate of less than 1%, clearly the proof is in the pudding. So I don't just want any monitoring system. I want a meaningful one, and looking at a small, manageable, not bigger than a bread box from a budget perspective, and then being able to plug in those elements, because people change jobs. Credit cards have expiry dates, like things go off, and not everybody knows immediately that something like that has happened. And being able to spot that, having that constant monitoring to go, oh, okay, right, well, maybe there was a code change, or maybe, a payment got interrupted for something, and all of a sudden we have these flags going off. Yes, there are system alerts and monitors, but who's getting those? Is it the person who just left? If you've got that centralized monitoring system, ideally you have more than one person who's watching it, and you have that core set of individuals who are not only looking at specific alerts, because I probably wouldn't want to get, if I'm on, one of the teams, maybe one of the compliance teams, I don't necessarily need all the networking, alerts that are going on with their stuff, but having a core set of monitors centrally located, I think would be useful.
Yeah, I think my perspective on that, because I was part of the discussion a couple of years ago with Dr. Klein at HITRUST about doing some sort of there was some sort of incentive, because it was, if you were going to do this, maybe instead of a 2-year certification, recertification, you could extend that out a little bit. Or maybe there was, and I know insurance companies, cyber insurance companies will give you discounts, based on your security posture and things like that. So I think I'd have to have the questions answered, like who is getting that information and the level of information that they're getting. And then would there be any incentives to an organization for signing up for that versus we're going to do this ourselves internally, and then we're going to, you're still going to, as an auditor, you can still say, hey, I want to see the last 12 months of your continuous monitoring, and I want to see any of the anomalies that come out of it. But it's a whole nother thing to say, okay, well, now live, I'm going to give you access to my logs and let somebody else comb through those. So, but as a smaller organization, it may be, okay, well, part of my HITRUST subscription is I get a central monitoring system that I don't have to then have one of my own. It's kind of like having almost like an MSP that can kind of be that monitoring system. It works for HITRUST because then they can kind of help with, threats that they're seeing, indicators of compromise and things like that. So, I mean, it could be mutually beneficial for the industry, but I'd have to know from from an organization's perspective, what are the benefits of that for me?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I wonder if there's an opportunity to plug that in so that there's almost a monitoring. Inheritance is the wrong word because it's not pulling from something else, but it's there's a natural organic score that doesn't have to then be created or established through the manual provision of evidence. It should be there. It's like giving your accountant access to your bookkeeping system, or your bookkeeper access to your kind of bookkeeping system as a business, so that they have some level of access. You don't have to give them everything, along with receipts and paperwork and all the other bits. So the streamlined effort.
The difference with that is my accountant isn't certifying, my financials.
That's
so
true.
there's like that judgment part of it that, I'm like,
yes.
If they're giving me my AAA rating or whatever, I may not want them to see everything real time. There may be a part of that I'm like, so that would be, that would be my only concern. But if it cut down on my audit costs, if it, helped with extending my certification, if there was something like that as an incentive, kind of the way cyber insurance companies will say, hey, we'll give you a discount on your premium if we have access to these indicators. And, it's very, it's very cut and dried as far as what they're going to see and all that. But, at the same time with an insurance company, well, are they going to just, cancel my contract because they see, indicators that they don't like? And, that's what you kind of worry about with the HITRUST thing is, are they going to pull my certification because suddenly things went haywire?
That's actually a good point. Do you remember the progressive snapshot? It was that thing that you plugged into your car, and so it would monitor your driving. So they claim that your rate will never go up; it can only go down. So if you don't qualify for the discount, you still get the same rate. Of course, it goes up every year, but
and they can choose not to renew. I mean, that's the thing. An insurance company doesn't necessarily cancel you, but they can say, you know what, we're not going to renew you again because you're a bad risk.
Yeah, and I think the original problem that I saw on LinkedIn was something. Well, there were multiple, but one of the original ones was, but your assurance process is only once per year, so that leaves, let's say, an 11-month gap. And I'm like, okay, that's obviously a problem that needs to be solved, but I don't know if it can be solved alone because there's a certain amount of trust that has to go in, like. You have to trust the process on the part of the external assessor. You have to trust the process on part of HITRUST, and then trust that HITRUST did the right thing through their multiple QA layers and all that other stuff. To where, and you also have to trust the entity that's HITRUST certified that they will continue doing the right thing at the appropriate times throughout. So I'm not sure what the right solution to the 11-month gap problem. Well, I shouldn't say gap.
I wonder if there's a threshold. Yeah, I wonder if there's a threshold instead of, a specific score or immediate red flags that go up. If there's a threshold where if you wander into, some sort of threshold that requires action, there's not, you're not in a specifically, risk or out of
Right. It's not
compliance area
binary,
for
is what
high
you're saying. It's not like
trust.
pass,
It's not
fail, pass.
binary. Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's like
Yeah.
a key risk indicator, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're
It's
going
more of
into
an
the yellow
analog. It's
territory.
like your
Right.
your score's going up, it's going up, and then it's like, hey, I'm not doing anything about it. Okay, well now we need to step in and say something. Or, oh, I saw it going back down.
Hmm.
You handled it.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other thing I would wonder about is, so many small businesses are using, they're outsourcing, so they don't hold any of their own PHI. And so, what kind of contracts would need to be in place, for that kind of monitoring? Is it okay for me to have my vendor share that information and things like that? So that would probably be another consideration. I mean, I don't think it would necessarily be a stopping point, but it would be, hey, I need to renegotiate my contract with them because the only authorized users I was providing, in my contract, the only authorized users are, you know, my own team versus, okay,
Hmm.
now I'm going to have a third party that's going to be taking some of that information
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a good concept to start with. And it kind of ties into what we talked about last week with continuous monitoring, being threat adaptive, so that
Hmm.
HITRUST is making sure their certification is sound, not just from the day they give it to you, but through that whole certification time period.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, then that makes HITRUST then would become an MSP or MSSP in
Yeah.
that perspective, which is something they do not want to do.
Yeah.
Um, and the continuing effort is a responsibility of the customer of the audited party. The rules specifically state that should you have a significant change, it invalidates your certification. Um, your requirement for continuously monitoring, that's management monitoring. I mean, it's, are you doing it or not?
Hmm.
From that perspective. So, I mean, that's already there, if you're actually doing it. But I mean, HITRUST isn't on the hook for anything, so they're not going to take a responsibility of ensuring that, you continue to meet the requirements. That's your problem. That's your responsibility. Now, as far as using third parties and whatnot, the new HIPAA rules, the new proposed rules, will actually address that specifically. Your third parties and your BAAs have to meet the same HIPAA specifications that you do.
Hmm.
And now their subcontractors have to meet those specifications. Before, it never went to that subcontractor of a BAA. Under the new rules, it does. And you have the responsibility, just like your BA has a responsibility, to ensure that your contractors are meeting the requirements. And a perfect example for this was 2 years ago, there was a small clinic. I don't remember exactly where it was at, but they were doing their transcription out through a third party. The third party had a breach. They reported it. There were only 1,190 records that were breached, if I remember the number correctly.
Hmm.
Um, but after OCR did its investigation, they find the vendor, the BA, um, you know, 200, roughly about $220,000 was their fine. Their fine back to the clinic that was using them was over $400,000 because they weren't
Hmm.
validating the security of their vendors.
Yeah. Yeah. And that $400,000 plus fine is right in line with, it's more than $400 per record on average. So the 1,100, I mean, you get to pricey numbers really quickly. Even though it's only 1,100, I'm sure that $500,000 give or take price tag was very painful for a small clinic like that.
Yep, it was. It was
Hmm.
horrible.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So I wonder actually, going back to those monitoring and because, people are the supply chain overall is an increasing focus for a lot of conversations and some of the new legislation. I wonder if there's an opportunity to create a monitoring environment, but not as a live feed. So it's live monitoring, but maybe it's then a push the button feed. So you can review your reports and push the button once a month or once a quarter, whatever, as like okay, yep, we're in a good spot. You push that. Now, if you don't push it the 12 times through the year, then you're not gonna get the monitoring credit on your next HITRUST assessment. So you have to do it. You have to push the button. You have to be in a good spot and push that button 12 times a year. But that could be a push feed that is, yes, those organizations who are achieving it, it's that step up. It's that higher level that they can achieve without going, what is somebody going to do with this live information? Because that is a real challenge and it's a blocker for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, when I worked for a large business associate, they had their own threat team that would just be looking. They were threat hunters, and they would just be looking for that.
Mm-hmm.
They would share it with HISAC, but only after all of everything was sanitized and all it had
Mm-hmm.
run through that whole process. But because of the volume of transactions that they were seeing, they were probably one of the first people to report things, but they were never going to let somebody in to just get access directly. They were,
Right.
okay, when we're ready, we will share that with you, and it may take a couple of hours before they were okay, we can share this. But and they would remember there were a couple of their covered entities that they would contact to say, hey, we're noticing email coming from you guys that looks
Mhm.
like it's being spoofed or something like that. So I mean, they were very cooperative when it came to sharing information. It's just they
Mhm.
wanted to have that control of when that information was shared, so that could be a way to do it, where that way somebody can,
Mhm.
they push that button, somebody, that's the information that goes, okay, now we're good to send it, as opposed to, yeah, let's just have a
Right.
live, feed all the time or
Yeah.
on demand,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
somebody feels like going to get the information, they come in and take a look at it. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, every organization is going to go information sharing. What's in it for me?
But if you hit the button 12 times a year and HITRUST can come and say, we'll make your assessments easier, and we have insurance partners who are willing
Right.
to say, we will give you favorable rates. If you hit that button 12 times a year and you've achieved these metrics, we will give you more favorable rates.
Yeah.
Those are big
Yes.
cost impact for a lot of businesses.
Correct.
I trust
Yeah.
one of the positions is already that you'll get favorable rates on your cyber insurance
Hmm.
if you have a certification.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you consider favorable these days is always subjective.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it's a difference of getting it or not.
You can always get it from Sam's Club.
Your cyber insurance from Sam's. Okay.
Sam's Club is what I call just anybody who will give you something.
Oh, okay.
Yes, fair enough.
I'm slowly changing that to Jeff.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Amazon.
More of there are corporations
Okay, I thought
though
you
who
meant
are
Jeff
looking,
McHugh.
No, no, no,
uh,
no.
Yeah, I'll
but who
sell
are
it to
looking
you.
at seriously at self-insurance because they're struggling to get cybersecurity insurance at any sort of like realistic rate.
Well, cyber insurance is, um, in reality, is just another false hope.
Hmm.
And the reason I say that is you can get it, but the statistics have shown that very few people, when they actually try to submit a claim for it, are actually meeting the requirements for it to be
Hmm.
a covered claim. So,
Absolutely.
these insurance companies will, some of them will happily give it to you. knowing that you're not going to meet their requirements should you
Yeah.
actually have an incident.
Hmm.
You know, but again, those are ones that you're just going to find, off the wall pretty much anywhere. If you're
Yeah.
going with any of the large companies, it's going to be super expensive. They're only in place for the larger companies to
Yeah.
use.
I think one of the bigger challenges is actually going back to the supply chain, where the business associates are required by the covered entities to cover a minimum amount, to carry a minimum amount of cybersecurity insurance.
Right.
And that's where it has a knock-on effect of those the business associates are then turning around going, okay, I need X million in cybersecurity insurance. How do I meaningfully obtain that? And some of the insurance companies are going, we won't go up to that amount. We'll only go to this amount. And therein lies some of the kind of crucial negotiations that are leading organizations to go, okay, how do we actually deliver this for our clients to show that, we are actually covered to the level that their contract requires us to be.
Yeah. And if the one of the only ways that some of these companies are going to do that is through multiple policies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I did a post-incident review last year on a company that thought, well, we've got a policy, our BA's got a policy, our there's other people involved in here. Our parent company's got a policy. No, that's going to cover our expense. Come to find
Mm-hmm.
out, the insurance company said, no, we're not, you guys were so far out of spec on this that we're not covering any of it. And they were trying to come up with about $33 million in coverage to cover the uh, fines, penalties, class action suits, everything else that was going along with this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, granted, they were so far out of spec that you know, it was painful.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, you know, that's why I don't mind doing those after the fact. But
All right.
yeah,
Well, we're almost
insurance
up
is,
at time. Does anybody have anything else, or is there something we should talk about next week? Any kind of questions we can go research and talk about?
I, um, one of the subjects, that we touched on was some of the changes in HIPAA, and here, given Stephen's comment, and I agree with him that others are using this, but the HIPAA changes are certainly making changes in HITRUST. I don't know what that impact is, but it's got to be. So I wonder what that is, and
Okay.
how we
Yeah,
can
we'll
find out.
definitely take a look. And we are trying to work with, I've still got some communications into some HITRUST people to invite them to come to some of these and just, talk about whatever they want to talk about. Hopefully looking at like the top 10 findings that HITRUST, gets control, that where they get corrective action plans, where caps are assigned, and just seeing, okay, what are those? What evidence would address those, and so hopefully help people avoid those pitfalls. So hopefully we can get somebody live from HITRUST to talk about that. Otherwise, we can just kind of go over some of the notes that they provide to me. So that'll be a topic coming up for a week or two in advance, or a week or two from now. So,
Okay.
Anything else? All right. Well, I'll give you guys 7 minutes back in your day.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
guys.
thanks, guys.
See ya.
Hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you got value from this episode, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next HITRUST Secrets. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central and dig into real-world compliance and security topics. And each session gets uploaded right here after the live show. So whether you're catching us live or on your own time, make sure you're subscribed. We'd love to have you along on your HITRUST journey.